The great and the good of the Premier League gathered yesterday, and they had a vote. Well, they were talking about a whole bunch of things. But the question is, have the Premier League missed a trick in not closing the multi-club ownership avenue? The vote to enforce a temporary ban on loan deals between clubs with the same owners fell one short, ended up 13-7. 14 votes were needed. And that would have brought about a ban. It didn't happen. So it's reported the clubs who voted against the move, Newcastle, Man City, Chelsea, Everton, Wolves, Forest and Sheffield United, they won the day. So in other words, Simon, it's still allowable for clubs under the same ownership to loan players between each other.
Yep.
What's your take on that? Because, as you said...
It's a poor decision.
Yeah, this was simply turkeys voting for Christmas, right?
It's a poor decision. And you look at the clubs that have likely voted for it: Man City, Newcastle, Sheffield United, Chelsea, Wolves, and so I understand Everton, because Everton are just fed up with the Premier League full stop, and perhaps people would say understandably. Most of those clubs have Middle Eastern money, so there's no so you're looking at vested interest. You're looking at the nature of those particular football clubs having vested interest in maintaining this particular scenario, because at this moment in time, the game in town is Saudi. Saudi's got all the money in terms of the expectation is they're going to spend lots and lots of money, create lots of opportunities, and they own a significant proportion of these football clubs. So I think it's a poor decision. You know, the idea that we're trying to get some form of governance into the game, not to stifle entrepreneurialism, not to stifle capital investment, not to maintain cartels, but to maintain some form of order and to maintain some sort of governance over football clubs so they're not dependent on individuals that may change their minds or run out of money, is the order of the day. And in this instance, vested interest overcomes the common good of what football probably requires, which is not allowing this to go on. But because of the nature of the voting criteria, the grown-ups in the room that don't have vested interest would have voted against this. The ones that do, Man City are going to vote against it? Of course they're not. Are Chelsea going to vote against it? Of course they're not. Why are Chelsea not going to vote against it? Because half the money that's gone into buying Chelsea is Middle Eastern money that's funded Clear Lake's purchase of, or Clearwater's purchase, or is it Clear Lake or Clearwater?
Clear
Lake,
yeah.
Purchase and through private equity. So all of these guys, Sheffield United, Middle Eastern money. You look at it and go, okay, fantastic, well done. What a
wonderful... What's your argument? It creates an unfair advantage.
Of course it does. Well, it creates an opportunity to find your way around challenges like financial fair play and find your way around situations where you've solved a problem by selling a player to another football club or a football club that you're associated with that gets him off your books and breaches and gets you away from the obligations of a financial, and then you loan him back.
Yeah, but
brilliant. Well done.
I get the cynicism around
Excellent.
The cynicism around why the decisions were made and who's making them for what reason. Fine, but the outcome is not that important, because the outcome of this decision isn't going to make a big difference. If you
I'm with you in that.
Let me tell you why.
I know where you're going with it.
If you think of the amount of loan players that have ever turned up in January from all over the world and had an impact, there's very few. And if they were that good, these players who they're bringing in January, they'd already be in the squads. So you might be filling a hole here and there.
So for talking sake,
you're talking about the football side of things. You're talking about...
Yeah, but that's the only side of it. I'm not talking about the cynicism around the decision making.
But you're basically saying if Neves was to go to Newcastle under an instance like this, he's not going to, because of the Tonali situation, him being out, he's not going to clinch them the Premier League title.
Is he heck? If he was that good, he'd be.
If he was
that good, Jim, he'd be at Newcastle, be at one of the teams.
But that's not
already.
really the raging argument about why they want it stopped.
Well, no, but I'm talking.
They don't want it stopped because they're going to get a good player on the cheap in a situation that gets them into.
You've still got to pay the wages, and you're only allowed a certain amount of loan. But you're only allowed a certain amount of loan players.
And that's fine, but that's not their argument.
Who's they?
The argument for the 13 clubs that clearly think it's a sensible thing.
So their argument's about what? FFP?
Of course it is.
That's fine.
Of course it is. But that's the only argument in the room. Your argument is a micro level, not being able to loan these players. They'll get another player on loan then.
Exactly.
And your argument will still be that player wouldn't solve the problem. So it's not about whether this player is going to kick them up a couple places in the league.
But that's what some people's narrative is.
Well, that's maybe the football manager's narrative. But the actual owners that are voting in the room, right? They're not thinking, maybe this is going to kick this club up. They're looking at it going, this is a way around financial governance. This is a way that bucks a system at a time. It's like we had this argument yesterday about the agents.
Give me a simplified example of that. How's it changed because it's a club that you own?
Well, because if you've got Saudi, if the case in point is Saudi, it's been characterised as being a Newcastle problem. It's not a Newcastle problem. There's ownership in the Middle East of our football clubs already. So this idea that these clubs that are now buying football clubs, and specifically Saudi right now for the purpose of this conversation, are buying players that are taking financial fair play problems away from the player that the club they're buying him from.
Initially, when they sign him.
So they buy him. So if somebody dumps a financial fair play problem because they've got a £40 million player that's stinking the place out, they want to get rid of him. him. They take him off their books. They haven't got the cost implications of him, and they capitalise their balance sheet. He then gets loaned back to another Saudi football club. So that facilitates a solution for the first football club in terms of getting around their financial fair play. And back he comes through the door and provides a solution to another Saudi-owned football club. It can't be right for football. It can't be right. Now, with that in mind, vested interest has overcome collective responsibility. And this is the irony of football. And what, we were arguing yesterday.
Why would Everton vote for it?
Because I think it just honestly, because I think they're keeping their options open about who's going to fund the purchase of Everton Football Club and who's going to make up the money for 777 Capital to come in and buy it and fund it.
Wolves, Forest.
Because Wolves have got a great relationship with the Middle East. You look at Forest. I don't know if Forest have voted against it. I do know, in principle, my understanding, without knowing specifically, the six club that I'm talking about have vested interest. Right, the seventh one I couldn't find out yesterday. You guys are alluding to the fact it might be Nottingham Forest or Burnley. I don't know that argument.
Voting against
Forest would make sense.
Voting against this process from happening. In other words, the loaning of the players from happening. Newcastle, Man City, Chelsea, Everton, Wolves, Forest, and Sheffield United.
Yeah, but that's not. I've got Man City, Newcastle, Sheffield United, Chelsea, Wolves, and Everton. That's the six I've got.
Well, Forest must be in there.
So there's one more you need to get to the quorum.
Well, Forest
so I don't know who the seventh is.
It's understood it's Forest.
Okay. Well, that may well be, because he owns Olympiacos and quite fancies this argument about multi-club ownership. So everything's about vested interest. We discussed the principles of collective responsibility and bargaining and all that goes with it yesterday about agents and everything else that goes in the game. The irony of it is that when it suits people, they want collective responsibility. Oh, no. We should all be paying the same amount of money down to the EFL. It shouldn't be weighted up. The big clubs are arguing it shouldn't be weighted up. Now, when the dynamic suits the individual clubs, hang on, all for ourselves. It's the wrong move. All the big clubs in the league, besides the ones that have vested interest, are not for this.
I see where you're going with it. Danny, we'll carry it on the other side of the break, but I might put it out there, Simon. Why a Premier League vote? Is it not a FIFA issue? Should it not be in that domain? Because we know what the likes of Saudi-owned Newcastle United are going to do. But you've just established why Forest under Marinakis might do the same.
But maybe it should be. But the FIFA are the international federation and not the domestic governance. Yeah. And ultimately, you look at the situation and say, well, that each league has its own obligations. Certain leagues will allow certain things to happen, like foreign ownership or certain nation states owning football clubs in different countries. Our policies are slightly different.
Okay. Why is that a Premier League vote? Why should it not be a FIFA issue and then the outcome would be different? As long as it's a Premier League vote, you've got individuals in the vote who have very much vested interest.
You mean it's a FIFA policy rather than a FIFA vote? Because FIFA don't govern the domestic game.
It's an international issue.
Well, it is an international issue, but each federation, each country have its own domestic policies. So it's not FIFA's governance that affords jurisdiction over what happens with the individual leagues. And the individual leagues should be able to make individual decisions based upon the economic climate in which those leagues perform in.
Yeah, but why ask clubs who have a vested interest in getting the right outcome, ask them to vote? Because, you know how they're going to vote.
Well, you do and you don't. You would have expected. I would not have expected to have seen. I can. The usual suspects. Would I have expected Man City? Yeah. Would I have expected Newcastle? Yes. Would I have expected Sheffield United? Yes. Would I have expected Chelsea? Yes. And why would I have expected those four clubs? Because Middle Eastern money props up Chelsea's acquisition. Middle Eastern money owns Sheffield United. Man City's owned by Middle Eastern money. Newcastle's owned by Middle Eastern money. So I would have expected those four clubs. Would I have expected a couple of outliers in there? Wolves, and because of their particular perspective and persuasion on certain deals. Yes, I might have done. Would I have expected...
Forest is logical in some way.
Maybe because...
The vote was 13-7. They needed 14. Is a quorum of 14 too much? Should it not just be a majority?
But that is the majority. The majority would be 13, wouldn't it? Still, the point is that
no, you could have a different outcome.
You can have
it doesn't need to be 13. 14 seems too high a quorum.
But that is the structure that's been put in place for some significant period of time. Because you've got six typically big clubs that if they vote the way they want, then all they need is one more. It's incumbent, because we tend to have these discussions that are driven by the big six clubs wanting to do something, which may not necessarily be for the better interests of the other 14 clubs. So if you've already got six in the bag, right, as the six clubs that are already looking for something to be changed, which is normally to their advantage, they only need to get one more and they're across the line.
There's Jamie who's saying, I'm loving Simon on this, but I need more information. Oliver and Hove is saying the same thing. Right, Simon seems to be saying that clubs gaining an advantage by borrowing players from other clubs with the same ownership isn't really the issue.
Correct.
So can he now explain the precise issue?
Well, the precise issue is the financial... It's not about clubs getting a better player on the pitch. as a loan deal. It's about the clubs in the division looking at the mechanics of how financial governance is going to be sought to be overridden by the ownership models that are now coming into football. And if you start to close the doors, and one of them is, for example, if you've got Saudi money invested in a football club, interesting, Brighton didn't vote for it. They're a multi-club ownership deal as well.
That's true.
If you've got Saudi money invested in one particular football club, and they sell a player at a price that suits the football club that's selling it. So Chelsea sell Benjamin or the goalkeeper, Mendy. Not Benjamin Mendy, the other Mendy. And they get 40 million quid from him. He's not really worth that kind of money. But
let's say he's worth 20 and they get 40.
Right. So
that money goes to Chelsea.
So Chelsea have now got rid of a player they don't want. They've got an obligation off their books from financial fair play. Saudi have effectively bought the club because we know that Saud's a player, because we know Saudi are funding everything in Saudi. The state are funding all aspirations, most of the football clubs in there, with a desire to be able to build them up. At the same time as having ownership in our football league, they then take a player off Chelsea's book, remove a financial fair play problem for Chelsea because they've got Saudi money in Chelsea, and they can loan this player back to someone else if it suits them to.
Right.
So it's not about the Saudi side of the equation; it's about what's happening in our league.
But just to be clear, they don't. Once they've signed the player for an inflated price that helps Chelsea or whoever else does it, they don't then have to loan them to another club, do they? They can still manipulate financial fair play without the loan system in place.
Of course, but if you close the door, you make it less attractive for them to do so, because Saudi wants investment into English clubs. They want English clubs to be successful.
I get that, but we're trying to simplify it for laymen.
So what happens next is some Saudi-owned football club in England, or whatever Middle Eastern country it is, whatever country it's from, right, wants to decide that they buy an XYZ player from XYZ club for a huge amount of money because it helps XYZ club in the Premier League get past some financial fair play, and then loan him back to him.
But is this not what's been going on at all?
Second?
Has it gone on at all of any level?
No, but we're only beginning to see now the absolute motivation of what's happening in certain parts of the world and the challenges that could happen to the understanding. What I've said all along is, let's have the Saudis spend as much money as they want. Let them participate in world football. Who should stop them? But let's make sure that the governance that we all have to live by doesn't get compromised by what the Saudis do.
So what we're saying...
So the Saudis get put under some sort of financial fair play regime and consequences. They buy our players from our domestic league, prepared to pay inflated prices to it because they want to protect an investment in English football because that's the real cherry on the... And then they loan it back to get around... No. You've got to close those doors.
So what you're saying is, in an ideal world, you want the loan system, being able to loan players from clubs you own, stopped. And furthermore, on top of that, the most important bit would be long-term to have the inability to buy players from a club that has the same investment.
What you're trying to do is it's like putting fingers in a dike in terms of a dam. You know, you don't want you can't stop it because you've got this situation where you've allowed multi-club ownership. If you've got multi-club ownership and you're trying to enforce governance,
spending.
If you're trying to enforce governance, then you're going to have the argument about restriction of trade. Okay. Then you're going to have the argument about a whole raft of things because people that are seeking to get round it, multi-club ownership provides a compromise to financial governance. Everybody knows it does because it will be utilised in a way, and even more glaringly, if you've got this particular agenda from one particular part of the world that's also owning football clubs now in our country, that's being used to be able to do these sort of deals. If you close it down now, you'll then move on to the next level of closing down something else because we're trying to get governance.
We're about to hit the 11 o'clock bulletin. Before we go, there's one message. So Simon, in theory, could a Saudi-owned club buy Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle, say for 150 million quid, if Newcastle needed to balance their books, and then that Saudi club loans him back to Newcastle?
Well, I don't know if that particular transaction, or in terms of ownership models that own one another, can do that deal as it stands right now. But if they can, it's precisely what you don't want, which is what I just said a moment ago. Yeah. What I said was the last thing you want to see is a different agenda from a different part of the world breaking the system. We've seen it. I don't care what Man City fans say. We've seen it. We've also seen it done previously in other incarnations. We've seen it done by Abramovich, and we've seen to some extent it done by Jack Walker, all in different guises. Yeah. And we're trying to get to a point, and should want to get to a point, where there's not a cartel, but there is an ability to football to stand on its own 2 feet without needing to be propped up by other people's money.
Ivan, the Newcastle fans, put it into his own vernacular. This vote is just another attempt by the Premier League clubs to stop the mighty Toon from being the league's top dogs in the near future. They tried to stop the sale to the Saudis. They failed. Up the mighty Newcastle. We're coming to get you, says Ivan.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10. On AM, on DAB, via the TalkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. TalkSPORT.